We explore, and you call us criminals. We seek after knowledge, and you call us criminals. We exist without skin color, without nationality, without religious bias, and you call us criminals. You build atomic bombs, you wage wars, you murder, cheat, and lie to us and try to make us believe it's for our own good.
Members of Congress, my fellow Americans.
Yet we're the criminals. Yes, I'm a criminal. My crime is that of curiosity. My crime is that of judging people by what they say and think, not by what they look like. My crime is that of outsmarting you, something that you'll never forgive me for. I'm a hacker, and this is my manifesto. And you may stop this individual, but you can't stop us all. That is a powerful piece of writing because it is so fundamentally revolutionary. And I really like the part in there where he says, my real crime is that of outsmarting you. And that's what they really hate. I mean, that's why they really hate Aaron Swartz, right? Because he's too fucking smart. Ed Snowden, another great example, too fucking smart. Information is the new gold. It's the new oil. It's like diamonds. It's worth trillions of dollars. And if you control that, you control wealth, you control power. You don't even have to be an infotech company. You could be an oil company, for example. You want to control information about climate change and induce the belief in people that climate change science is a fraud. Because if you can control that information, you could save yourselves, billions and trillions of dollars in regulation.
I'll just say this, we've been here before. Every new media goes through a similar cycle, where at the beginning it's decentralized, it's open, it's very culturally dynamic, all kinds of things are going on, it's a little chaotic, unpredictable. Invariably, this is true in film, true of the telephone industry, radio industry, it begins to consolidate and centralize. And in some ways that feels like a very good development at the time. But then only later do we realize what we've lost.
The internet has a chance to be a platform that enables an extraordinary amount of innovation and creativity and democratic organization in a way that we've not seen for more than 100 years. Increasingly, we want to have our own blog. We want to tweet about the candidate and engage in arguments about the positions and go out and organize our own meetups around political action. And that's because the technology has encouraged us, once again, to become owners in the political process. We need to recognize that the freedom here is embedded in the technology, and we have to protect the technology if we want to be protecting this freedom.
It all starts with my mother buying us a computer when we were like 9 years old. And we were like, this thing is cool, we like it, we can do what we want with it.
We control Lisa by pointing to these images on the screen with this unique item called a mouse.
Fast forward, I worked in Silicon Valley, first bubble, and I saw the way things were going, and it kind of made me nervous. So I got into it, I wrote a paper. I don't know, I had no idea what would happen. I didn't really think it would become a movement to try to save the, there's sort of been a movement to sort of try and save the internet. I didn't self-consciously think about being part of that. I just thought something should be done.
As I said, I spent the last 4 years looking at the history of the American information industries. And what you see is a powerful tendency for information industries to give birth to powerful monopolies.
And we have to be very careful to see that Verizon, AT&T, Comcast don't end up being essentially the gatekeepers of the internet. That's extremely important.
There is an abundant opportunity when you run a company that controls information to control the minds of people in the nation.
I kind of thought the internet was this incredible experiment in building a network that anyone could be on. And it seemed pretty clear to me, even at that point, first .com boom, that there were a lot of forces that were interested in reversing the nature of the network, kind of turning it upside down and making it essentially a commercial project. Channels of speech being open and some basic commons for speaking are essential to democracy. And when that becomes merely a function of money, the republic is threatened. It is the thing that the revolutionaries realized immediately. It's one of the reasons they had the revolution, was of the danger of too much influence on money and politics, and we still haven't solved the problem.
I got my start in virtual worlds. So I had a virtual newspaper that covered events inside of The Sims Online, and some of the stories just made me really unpopular with the game company. So I had one story about these teenage boys that were role-playing as cyber prostitutes, and they ran a cyber brothel, and they were cybering people for game currency, which they then sold on eBay. And the day after that story came out, I got kicked out of The Sims Online. And then that went viral, of course, because how could it not? So that it went from a blog that was run by academics that study virtual worlds to Salon.com to the New York Times front page, and then eventually, of course, The Daily Show.
My name's Lawrence Lessig, and I'm a professor of law at Harvard University, and I direct the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University. The work of the center has been focused on what we call institutional corruption, which is, you can think of it as legal corruption rather than illegal corruption. So influences that undermine the effectiveness of an institution. So think about the way Congress funds its elections. Private funds fund public elections. There's nothing illegal about that. Indeed, it's constitutionally protected, but it leads most people to believe money buys results in Congress and thereby weaken public trust of Congress, and also many people believe it blocks the ability of Congress to address fundamental important issues in the way that the people would actually want to, as opposed to a tiny slice of the populace that directs and controls elections.
I think as a nation, Americans are slightly insensitive to the problem of the influence of money on speech. And so I do therefore think it is the job of government or of the public, either can be fine, to reserve at least some speech areas where it's not all about money. The internet was invented to be that place. In some ways it still is, but the question is whether it can stay that place.
It's critical that the network continue to empower people to act free of government and corporate control to organize for whatever political end they want to organize to. That's the internet. That's its architecture. Its end-to-end, peer-to-peer architecture is that design. So the only chance we have in overcoming what I think of as this core corruption of our government is through the internet. It's the only way. Now, that's not to say that we're likely to win. I'm not sure what the odds are, and I'm not confident the odds are good. But whatever the odds are zero if we lose the basic structure of the net.
So the internet is a battleground in this sense, right? So it's not like the internet's going to liberate us, or it's not like the internet's going to imprison us. We're fighting over the internet. So this is not a time for Republicans and Democrats to be sniping at each other. To me, we can all be unified in our politics on this particular point. We need to find out what the fuck is going on, because it's going on sort of behind the curtain. You got to pull that curtain aside and understand what's going on, because we can all agree on this thing. The game is rigged. Let's find out exactly how it's rigged and get to the bottom of it. A hacker to me is somebody that takes traditional technologies and then mixes them up and gives them a new purpose. And an activist is, of course, someone who's like a political activist. So a hacktivist is someone who takes technology, repurposes it, and uses it for some social or political cause. What we saw in the Arab Spring were people taking these technologies like Twitter and using them in ways that nobody expected them to be used. I mean, no one thought, oh my God, Twitter, what a great idea for a revolution. And people just said, this is a tool I can use. And so they took it and ran with it. But you say you can't stop people from using it for political activism or something. Oh yes, you can. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was written in 1985, shortly after the movie War Games came out, right? And people thought, wow, someone could start World War III by dialing in a 300 baud modem from their Apple II or whatever he had. First of all, let's talk about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and how easy it is to violate it. It says you can't use a computer for purposes that were unintended. And the Holder Justice Department has interpreted that to mean if you violate the terms of service agreement for a computer program, you're in violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I'm talking about the little thing where you have to check the box before you can use the software, right? It says, check this box to say that you agree to the terms of service, which you never read, none of us do, but you check the box because you want to use the software. Well, in the fine print are thousands and thousands of things that sort of could put you in violation of the terms of service. Example, 17 magazine. If you were to use 17 magazine and you agree to the terms of service, you are agreeing that you are at least 18 years old. So if you're 17 years old and you are reading 17 magazine online, you are a felon. OkCupid, Match.com, you have to click one of these things before you use their service. And on there it says that you agree that you're not going to lie about anything you say. So if you lie about like your size or whatever on Match.com or OkCupid, you are a felon. So the question is, if everyone's a felon, then who do we prosecute? And that's why this is dangerous, because it means a prosecutor can pick and choose. So they know they can get you. They know you're in violation of the CFAA, right? So all they have to do is decide who's a threat to the system, and that's the person they go after.
Thanks. Now that you've seen the theory behind Creative Commons, it's time to show you some of the practice. So when you come to our website here,
at age 14, he was blowing people away in Silicon Valley with what he could do.
Books are such important artifacts. They're the kind of repositories of knowledge in our culture.
Because for everything, there's someone who cares a great deal about it. And that's what television, that's what radio doesn't provide, but the internet does.
I first met him at conferences. His parents would chaperone him as a 12 or 13-year-old to attend these computer conferences. I invited him to be the core architect of Creative Commons. I got to watch him grow up. It was the first experience of being a father. At the age of 14, he helped co-design the RSS protocol. 15, he was the core architect for the technical infrastructure for Creative Commons. 19, he began Infogami, which eventually merged with Reddit. And from the age of 20, he worked in a series of incredible projects.
What we try and do is we try and organize people. I think the internet really provides this chance to realize that you can accomplish something.
So Aaron was a hacker. What this hacking is the use of technical knowledge to advance a public good. We need to celebrate the activity of hacking.
whether you're going after the government, whether you're releasing documents that they have tried to keep secret, whether you're telling a reporter about, malfeasance that's gone on. The government can't stop any of that.
In 2008, he helped liberate a database called PACER, which is where all the U.S. court filings are. Aaron arranged to put $1.5 million worth of American court filings into RECAP, which everybody thought was awesome except for the FBI, who opened a file on him, they staked him out, they brought him in for questioning without his lawyer. The next thing he did that made headlines was getting involved with a thing called JSTOR.
Every time someone has written down a scientific paper, it's been scanned and digitized and put in these collections. That is a legacy that has been brought to us by the history of people doing interesting work, the history of scientists. It's a legacy that should belong to us as a commons, as a people. Once I realized that there were real serious problems, fundamental problems that I could do something to address, there was really no going back. By virtue of being students at a major U.S. university, you have access to a wide variety of scholarly journals. Pretty much every major university in the United States pays these sort of licensing fees to organizations like JSTOR and Thomson and ISI to get access to scholarly journals. And these licensing fees are substantial, and they're so substantial that people who are studying in India, they're locked out from our entire scientific legacy. But you have a key to those gates. And with a little bit of shell script magic, you can get those journal articles. Once you have a copy, theoretically, you could make it available to everyone. In the same way that people did civil disobedience, broke the rules for the civil rights movement, it's actually a serious problem that the vast majority of the planet doesn't have access to our accumulated scientific knowledge. And I think it might be worth breaking a couple rules to solve that problem.
The Federal Communications Commission has adopted new rules on network neutrality. The new guidelines are designed to limit the control that corporations such as Google and Verizon wield over the content that consumers see on the web. Joining me now is the inventor of the term net neutrality, Tim Wu. He is a professor at Columbia University. Pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
The net neutrality vote means what?
What that means is that it's illegal for a carrier company, let's say Verizon, to block let's say Hulu or Bing, a site it doesn't like.
Yeah.
The carriers have to carry all the websites. That's the basic idea of net neutrality.
And was there a real threat that they would do that?
But what history shows is over time, eventually, what was once the young, exciting new media becomes increasingly consolidated, increasingly closed, dominated by a monopolist or an oligopoly. There's an important lesson in the history of communications, which is that, in fact, government likes monopolies because they can be used to serve political ends. Now, Western Union came perilously close to that example. You had a monopolist over the instant moving of information. That is the only way to get information from A to B instantly, is one company. And that one company happens to think the Republican Party should be in government forever. So it gives an enormous advantage to all the Republican candidates. Those situations are some of the most dangerous to the democratic system. And it's no coincidence, there's other reasons too, but the fact is you had Republican administrations from Lincoln onwards all the way to Woodrow Wilson, in part on the back of the telegraph system. That may seem like a 19th century problem. I think you see some of the same problems today. It was clear that the Bush administration liked the increasing concentration of AT&T for national security reasons.
It is in our national interest, and it's legal. It's in our national interest because we want to know who's calling who. From overseas into America, we need to know in order to protect the people.
In fact, it's often been the case that the national security parts of the government want there to be a single company in charge of information, either so they can defend against a threat or more dangerously so they can spy on citizens. So say that again, the governments tend to like information monopolies because if they can have some control or some influence over that information monopoly, it increases their power. That is the danger. It's not simply a danger of higher prices or bad service. It is a much more fundamental danger to the nature of Republican government itself. Because if you have an information monopolist who is essentially complicit with government, acting hand in hand, it comes very close to a fascist system of government.
You once claimed that you have an ability to face unpleasant facts. Is that what you've demonstrated in 1984 by drawing an accurate portrait of the future?
This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen.
I grew up with the understanding that the world I lived in was one where people enjoyed a sort of freedom to communicate with each other in privacy, without it being monitored, without it being measured or analyzed or sort of judged by these shadowy figures or systems.
When the powers of dictators shall be taken all away, there'll be smoke on the water.
I joined the intelligence community when I was very young, sort of the government as a whole. I enlisted in the Army shortly after the invasion of Iraq, and I believed in the goodness of what we were doing. I believed in the nobility of our intentions to free oppressed people overseas.
There'll be smoke on the water, on the land and the sea, when our army and navy overtakes the enemy. There'll be smoke on the mountains where the heathen gods stay, and the sun that is rising will go down on that day.
But over time, I increasingly was exposed to true information that had not been propagandized in the media. We were actually involved in misleading the public. The NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. Companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, they all provide the NSA direct access to all of the systems you use to communicate, to store data, to put things in the cloud. I think that's a dangerous capability for anybody to have.
People say, if I have nothing to hide, what's the worry? I'd rather have security, so I'd rather have the NSA spying on everyone. First of all, it's clear that the NSA, by doing this spying program, is not providing any extra security. In fact, it might be undermining security, because if you gather too much information, you don't know what information is valuable and what isn't. So I would rather have the NSA out there spying on terrorists instead of you and me, because if our information is there, it's just cluttering up their desk and prohibiting them from getting the information that they need. Now, you might say, oh, well, big data, their computer programs solve all that. That's bullshit, and I'm in a position to know. Unless you prepare your data correctly, which is a very meticulous process, data mining is not effective. So the NSA can talk about making us safe, but it's not doing that. And we need to sit and think about the very real possibility that it's making us less safe.
Control that gets erected for one reason, and maybe a good reason, gets deployed and exercised for a different reason, and not necessarily a good reason. So, you build the machine to deal with the terrorists. You then have a machine in place to deal with the copyright infringers, and not just the, quote, pirates, but now the people who remix without permission. And so you begin to build the infrastructure of control into the core of the internet, and it begins to be dialed towards every new problem that you describe. Now, again, I'm not an anarchist. I think the law needs to regulate certain kinds of behavior, but we need to be sensitive to the way in which we build an infrastructure for control that gives the government wildly too much power to regulate in contexts where liberty or innovation is threatened.
We begin tonight with new developments in the case of Aaron Swartz. In a recent closed-door hearing regarding the computer fraud prosecution of the internet activist, it was revealed by a Justice Department representative that Swartz was indeed targeted because of his politics. Back in 2008, Swartz and others laid out their views in a piece called the Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto. The manifesto, according to the Justice Department, demonstrated his intent in downloading content on a large scale.
He became a target, a political target, okay? And that's why all these things happened to him. There is no reasonable cause behind going after a young genius like that in the fashion they did. It's political.
I was at an event and I was talking and I got introduced to a US senator. And I asked him why, despite being such a progressive, despite giving a speech in favor of civil liberties, why he was supporting a bill that would censor the internet. And you know, that typical politician smile he had suddenly faded from his face and his eyes started burning this fiery red. And he started shouting at me. He said, "Those people on the internet, they think they can get away with anything. They think they can just put anything up there and there's nothing we can do to stop them. They put up everything. Well, we're gonna show them. There's gotta be laws on the internet. It's gotta be under control."
Everyone says they want to shut down these foreign criminals who are stealing American jobs. These two bills are designed to do that. They've been worked out for months.
It was Chris Dodd's first chance to demonstrate how powerful a lobbyist he was going to be. Chris Dodd, Democratic senator from Connecticut, when he retired, promised his citizens from Connecticut he would not become a lobbyist, and then turned around and became the head of the Motion Picture Association of America, the most powerful lobbying arm for the content industry in Washington. And he could command a very high price as the chief of the MPAA because people believed he had the ability to deliver on the goods. And the goods here meant being able to get laws passed through Congress. So he succeeded before the fight blew up on the internet in getting the commitment of all the key senators necessary to get this through the Senate and the same kind of support in the House. And it was going to be his victory lap. What content owners wanted was a simple, efficient way for them to get sites taken down. Now, look, there are plenty of pirate sites out there, and I don't support piracy. I'm not in favor of people taking other people's content and sharing it illegally. But, you know, you can agree with the objective to deal with, quote, piracy, and still not agree that we ought to give to the content owners basically an automatic right to go to a court and get the government to order a website off of the internet, which is basically what this was. It was the ability to get some domain name removed from the DNS or an IP address blocked and forcing people to comply with these blocking orders in a procedure that didn't give any basic due process to the people who were being challenged. I think SOPA is the best evidence that they just have not learned yet, and they're still waging this ever more vicious war on the idea that somehow they're going to bomb our kids into compliance. All they're going to do, like every war of prohibition, is to bomb our kids into radicalism, and they can't afford the radicalism of the next generation. When you sit down and you take somebody's music and you mix it with your video and you share it with your friends, that's the sort of activity we should be celebrating, not regulating.
Everything is this process of pulling things together and recombining them. What's worrying about this sort of copyright police is that they want to prevent recombination. They want to have the law come in and say recombination isn't legal. Congress was going to break the internet, and it just didn't care.
And to those who say that a bill to stop online theft will break the internet, I'd like to point out that it's not likely to happen.
Hey, does anyone on these committees charged with regulating the internet understand how any of this internet stuff works?
I'm not a nerd.
I am not a nerd.
I'm just not enough of a nerd.
Maybe we ought to ask some nerds what this thing really does. Let's have a hearing, bring in the nerds.
Really? Nerds? You know, I think actually the word you're looking for is experts.
There was just something about watching those clueless members of Congress debate the bill, watching them insist they could regulate the internet and a bunch of nerds couldn't possibly stop them.
The Pirate Bay is a notorious pirate site. Why don't you refuse to de-index the site in your search results?
Those hearings scared a lot of people. They saw this wasn't the attitude of a thoughtful government trying to resolve trade-offs in order to best represent its citizens. This was more like the attitude of a tyrant. And so the citizens fought back.
This is a movement that started organically on the internet by American citizens.
The main thing I think is interesting about SOPA was the strength of the reaction. And it wasn't simply the people in D.C. who care about these issues, but it was tech people, engineer people, young people, all kinds of people said, you know, I kind of like the internet the way it is, and I just don't think Hollywood's plan is going to make things better.
The war for the internet has begun. Hollywood is in control of politics. The government is killing innovation. Don't let them get away with that.
Everyone was thinking of ways they could help, often really clever, ingenious ways.
Then these pirates come and they steal all our internets.
They made infographics, they started PACs, they designed ads, they bought billboards, they wrote news stories, they held meetings. Everybody saw it as their responsibility to help. They threw themselves into it. They didn't stop to ask anyone for permission.
Let's get together, let's all unite, or they will do whatever they like.
At least 7,000 websites are going dark tonight at midnight, including one of the most heavily trafficked sites on Earth, Wikipedia, in what looks to be the biggest online protest ever conducted.
And of course, when the fight on the internet exploded and people started being outraged and started organizing so effectively across businesses and non-commercial sector, and I think here Wikipedia was the most important contributor because their motives could not be questioned. They're not playing a game to get bigger profits. They're just protecting their opportunity to provide important free information on the internet. And when push came to shove, you know, millions of people summoned by Wikipedia turned out to be more powerful than Chris Dodd. And he was furious.
Top lobbyist for Hollywood exclusively told Fox his industry is threatening to cut off money to the president.
Don't make the false assumption this year that because we did it in years past, we're going to do it this year. This industry is watching very carefully who's going to stand up for them when their job is at stake.
And it was like this blatant display of quid pro quo kind of threat. Okay, fine. You're not going to support our SOPA PIPA. Don't come to us for campaign money. Now, on the one hand, everybody in Washington knows that's the way things work. But on the other hand, to be so blatant about it was really quite outrageous and stupid, because after he said that, what senator could afford to change his vote? If you do, it's obviously you're doing it in response to the threat from the MPAA, which demonstrates the power of the MPAA to force you to do something you otherwise wouldn't do. It's a moment where the industry wakes up to recognize that they actually don't control the field. When the giant was sleeping, they could get all sorts of things through. But the giant has woken up. And every time we can frame these issues in a way that plugs into this interest of the internet, which is this interesting libertarian and liberal alliance, the internet's going to wake up.
Senate support has fallen apart. Now Majority Leader Harry Reid has scrapped Tuesday's vote. In the House, similar bills, same political problems, and the Speaker is urging committee leaders to just work this out.
The people rose up and they caused a sea change in Washington. Not the press, which refused to cover the story. Just coincidentally, their parent companies all happened to be lobbying for the bill. It was really stopped by the people. They killed the bill dead. So dead that it's kind of hard to believe this story. Hard to remember how close it all came to actually passing. That it wasn't a dream or a nightmare. It was all very real. And it will happen again. Sure, it will have yet another name, and maybe a different excuse. But make no mistake, the enemies of the freedom to connect have not disappeared. The fire in those politicians' eyes hasn't been put out.
They had an agenda that is about more control over the internet. And they made a strategic decision to say, who are we going to take out to send a strong message? And I was the one.
Mr. .com has been shown the warrant to search the property. He acknowledges it.
The mega case against Mega Upload is still at a standstill. The prosecution says it cannot gather enough evidence against Mega Upload founder Kim.com in a timely manner because there's simply too much on the servers. This comes after a local court ruled that the confiscation of his fortune was illegal. Now New Zealand won't extradite Kim until the evidence against him is fully accounted for. So what's going to happen to the 50 million user accounts data that was shut down with the takedown of Mega Upload? And what does this mean for copyright battle and internet freedoms at large? Aaron Swartz, founder and executive director of Demand Progress, joins me now. Do you think that this is just the content industry having the government do their bidding for them? I mean, this did happen days after SOPA was knocked down.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the content industry is behind all of this, and it's ridiculous that the government is doing the bidding.
It's all a game to them, really, and we are all the little puppets that they think they can kick around. So we need to organize. There needs to be a movement that identifies these things and fights that, not with shutting down websites, but with real protest, going out on the streets, writing to politicians, and especially, most importantly, don't vote for the guys that are against internet freedom. I'm not Aaron Swartz. Aaron Swartz is my hero. He was selfless. He is completely the opposite of me, but I mean, he stopped SOPA.
Aaron was able to mobilize the internet through Reddit and other places, and he shut it down. Now, we say, wow, what a hero. Aaron, that's tremendous. But you think now, how many billions of dollars were lost by multinational corporations because of that? Okay? And how many more billions of dollars are going to be lost when the next one comes along, you know, when TPP comes along? You need to shut this kid up, and you need to shut him down, right? And you need to do whatever it takes to do that.
I was in Mexico. I had just finished giving a talk, and I got a call from his friend. That's when I learned. I went onto the internet to see if anybody had noticed, and had this thought, well, what if nobody notices? And then finally fell asleep at about 2 in the morning, and I had to get up to catch a plane at 5. When I got up, I looked on the net, and it had just begun to explode. And I furiously typed a blog post, and then raced to the airport. And then on the flight from Mexico to someplace, I don't know where I landed, someplace in Texas, I think, I had written another very angry, long blog post about prosecutor as bully was the title, which I posted when I landed. And, you know, I think it was the thing I've written that has been read by the most people ever. I mean, it was just became the kind of defining frame for what had happened. Yeah, that's our government, our kids.
There's a profound sense of loss tonight in Highland Park, Aaron Swartz's hometown, as loved ones say goodbye to one of the internet's brightest lights.
He hadn't told me what was going on when we first started dating. All I knew that there was something bad happening in his life and that I was a good distraction from it.
Yeah, Aaron was depressed. He was rationally depressed. You know, he was losing everything.
The whole thing was so hard and so stressful. He carried so much of the weight of it on his own. He didn't want to involve any of his friends.
I don't have patience for people who want to say, oh, this was just a crazy person. This was just a person with a psychological problem. This was somebody who was pushed to the edge by what I think of as a kind of bullying by our government. All of us think there are 1,000 things we could have done. 1,000 things we could have done, and we have to do. Because Aaron Swartz is now an icon, an ideal. He's what we will be fighting for, all of us, for the rest of our lives.
When we turn armed agents of the law on citizens trying to increase access to knowledge, we've broken the rule of law. We've desecrated the temple of justice. Aaron Swartz was not a criminal. When the U.S. attorney told Aaron he had to plead guilty to 13 felonies for attempting to propagate knowledge before she'd even consider a deal, that was an abuse of power, a misuse of the criminal justice system. That was a crime against justice.
No, it doesn't change. No, it never changes. Yeah, it's always there. So, you know, he came to me it was December 2006. He was in Berlin for the Chaos Computer Conference. I was in Berlin for the year, so he came to visit, and we talked for the afternoon and evening. And we talked about the issues I was working on, copyright issues and the internet issues. Network neutrality was one of the issues. And he just, you know, he said to me, why do you expect that you're ever going to win on these issues so long as there is this corrupt system of government? And I said to him, well, you know, it's not my expertise, it's not my field. And he said, I get that as a professor, but as a citizen, how are you going to win? And it, you know, it is that Aaron type question because it's implicitly suggesting you have a role, it's your job. You know, it's not a debate about that, it's just now that we know it's your job, then what are you going to do to carry through on your work? And that was very powerful with me.
Breaking news, U.S. intelligence agencies have been secretly operating a broad data mining program that collected email, photos, and just about everything else from private communications from most Americans. That's according to the Washington Post and The Guardian. The Post says that Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, AOL, Skype, YouTube, and Apple were all involved. Well, joining me now is reporter Glenn Greenwald. Tell me briefly what the latest development is.
What this program enables the National Security Agency to do is to reach directly into the servers of the largest internet companies in the world, things that virtually every human being in the Western world now uses to communicate with one another, and take whatever it is that they want without any checks of any kind. There's no courts looking over their shoulder to see what they're taking, and they don't even have the check that they have to go to the internet companies and ask for it any longer. They've been given or have taken direct access into the pipes where all of these conversations take place and can suck up whatever it is that they want at any given moment.
I don't want to live in a world where everything that I say, everything I do, everyone I talk to, every expression of creativity or love or friendship is recorded. That's not something I'm willing to support. It's not something I'm willing to build. And it's not something I'm willing to live under.
Well, I'm deeply suspicious, obviously, because he went to China. It's not a place where you'd ordinarily want to go if you're interested in freedom.
It's sad, Brian. We've made treason cool. I mean, we need to get very, very serious about treason. You bring back the death penalty.
Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector anywhere. I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
PRISM is about content. It's a program through which the government could compel corporate America. It could sort of deputize corporate America to do its dirty work for the NSA. The NSA's own slides refer to it as direct access. But the bottom line is when we talk about how this information is given, it's coming from the companies themselves.
You imagine a partnership with Facebook and the federal government. If Facebook could do a lot that would be like intelligence work. They know a lot about us. And so this is the problem of overly concentrated private power, is it becomes an instrument of government action.
You don't have to have done anything wrong. You simply have to eventually fall under suspicion from somebody, even by a wrong call. And then they can use the system to go back in time and scrutinize every decision you've ever made.
I think he's a traitor.
Every friend you've ever discussed something with.
He's a traitor.
And paint anyone in the context of a wrongdoer.
No, I don't think Mr. Snowden was a patriot.
I think what we have in Edward Snowden is just a narcissistic young man.
He is not a patriot. He is not a hero.
It is literally, not figuratively, literally gut-wrenching to see this happen because of the huge, grave damage it does to our intelligence capabilities.
If I had just wanted to harm the U.S., you know, that you could shut down the surveillance system in an afternoon.
You do not dispute that Edward Snowden has broken the law, do you?
No, I think he's very clear about the fact that he did it because his conscience compelled him to do so, just like Daniel Ellsberg did 50 years ago when he released the Pentagon Papers and also admits that he broke the law. I think the question, though, is how can he be charged with espionage? He didn't work for a foreign government. He could have sold this information for millions of dollars and enriched himself. He didn't do any of that either. He stepped forward and, as we want people to do in a democracy, as a government official, learned of wrongdoing and exposed it so we could have a democratic debate about the spying system. Do we really want to put people like that in prison for life when all they're doing is telling us as citizens what our political officials are doing in the dark?
Edward Snowden, the man who told the world about the federal government's sweeping top-secret domestic spying program, is on the move as we speak this morning.
If they want to get you, they'll get you in time. But at the same time, you have to make a determination about what it is that's important to you.
Officials in Hong Kong say Snowden, who's been charged with espionage by the U.S. government, boarded a plane overnight. He will soon land in Russia, and this morning, the group WikiLeaks claims to be helping Snowden get away.
It's been a stunning turn of events here today. Edward Snowden, the man wanted on charges of espionage, suddenly out of the country, managing to board a flight from Hong Kong to, we believe, Russia.
There was no way to arrest him, according to the Hong Kong authorities, and, quote, no legal basis to restrict Mr. Snowden from leaving Hong Kong. So is there any pressure the United States can bring to bear on the Russians, with whom we already have an icy relationship, to stop him from carrying out this itinerary?
We're running this down right now, but apparently, though, there's nothing the United States can do as long as Snowden remains in that airport if he lands in Moscow in transit to Cuba. Apparently he's booked on a 2 p.m. flight tomorrow to Cuba, and some reports that he would then go on, as you said, to Venezuela.
People are wondering, how was this man able to outmaneuver the U.S., the top spy agency in the world, not once, but now twice, if we can't even locate him?
That is the big question. He was accessing all of this information from Booz Allen in Hawaii, and the alarm bells didn't go off in a way that he could be stopped before he slipped out of the country into Hong Kong and now on his way to Moscow.
Mr. Snowden has indeed arrived in Moscow. It was completely unexpected.
I have not called President Putin personally, and the reason is because I shouldn't have to. No, I'm not going to be scrambling jets to get a 29-year-old hacker.
Bravo 001, do you need any assistance upon landing?
We need to land because we cannot get a correct indication.
Evo Morales, Bolivia's leader, was forced to spend the night in Vienna after his plane was rerouted. Bolivian officials say it all stemmed from a rumor that Snowden had hitched a ride from Russia on the president's jet.
Edward Snowden, we are told, has now walked free and actually crossed the immigration zone and entered Russia officially.
He saw that if he just continued to let things happen as they were happening, this policy would go on unchecked. And he was going to have to go against his supervisors. He was going to have to break organizational protocol. And he did it because he could not participate in a system that was doing something evil.
When I really came to struggle with these issues, I thought to myself, how can I do this in the most responsible way that maximizes the public benefit while minimizing the risks? Out of going to Congress when there was no laws, there were no legal protections for a private employee, a contractor in intelligence like myself, there was a risk that I would be buried along with the information and the public would never find out. But the First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees us a free press for a reason. and that's to enable an adversarial press, to challenge the government, to have a dialogue and debate about how we can inform the public about matters of vital importance without putting our national security at risk.
The whole way to think about security in the big data world is different. You know, we used to have government surveillance that was episodic. First, physical invasions, episodically, you know, the police would break into your house and search for something. And then virtual invasions that were episodic. They would tap your phone. But because it was episodic, the legal system was pretty good at handling it, because every time you wanted to intervene, the question was, did you have enough evidence to justify that breach of somebody's privacy? But the architecture of information now is persistent surveillance. There's always surveillance, constant data gathered in every single point. And in that world, the issue isn't so much whether there's surveillance, the issue is what are the restrictions on how you use the data you have collected? And how do we have confidence in those restrictions, or confidence that those restrictions are being respected? And that's going to require a different way of thinking about protection. It's completely obvious that we're nowhere close to working that part out.
To see officials testifying under oath that there have been no abuses, that there have been no violations of the NSA's rules, when we knew this story was coming.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
The NSA lied about the existence of this tool.
So I responded in what I thought was the most truthful or least untruthful manner by saying no.
Mr. Clapper lied in Congress in defiance of the law in the name of security. Mr. Snowden told the truth in the name of privacy. Mr. Snowden hasn't lied to anyone. He did break his oath of office, but part of his oath of office is to the Constitution.
After all of this, are you as amazed as I am that with all of this dragnet, somehow the Boston Marathon bomber got through, that Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who had plenty of indicators that he may be up to no good on the internet and elsewhere, got through this dragnet?
The more information they collect about innocent Americans, the less able they are to actually prevent terrorist attacks, because at some point it becomes counterproductive. They have so much information that they don't even know what they have anymore, and they can't put it together. Remember that the 9/11 Commission made clear that the United States government had in its possession enough evidence to have alerted it to the existence of the 9/11 attack and simply never, in its words, connected the dots. The problem was never that they weren't collecting enough information. The problem is that they just don't know what they have. And the more they become obsessed with sweeping up billions of conversational data points every day and expanding that surveillance net, the less able they're going to be to achieve what the ostensible purpose of this program is, which is to stop things like the Boston Marathon killing, which they utterly failed to do.
People always ask me, is Ed Snowden a hero or a traitor? The real question is what he did right or wrong? Forget about whether he's a hero. It shouldn't even be considered heroic. It should be considered his duty. He has a duty to uphold the Constitution of the United States. He has a duty to fellow citizens to see that they're not enslaved and they're not become part of like a 1984 dystopia. I don't consider him a hero. I just consider him as a guy who on that day did what he was supposed to do. And good for him for that. You know, for the same reason, I'm not going to call Aaron Swartz a hero. I'm going to say he did what he ought to do.
There are different forces in these two fields. You know, Aaron was in the minefield of copyright. And the pressure to be extreme in the minefield of copyright comes, in my view, from the extraordinary influence that these industries have, especially on the Democratic Party. So, you know, as much as Obama tried to set himself up as the internet president, as the person who understood the free culture movement, he got the openness and the necessity for information to flow freely. From the very beginning, his administration was totally aligned with the most extreme copyright positions. So they were not going to show any mercy in a case which implicated copyright. But in the Edward Snowden context, it's a different kind of monster that's driving it. It's this, national security fight of a war on terror like monster. And Obama has a very strong desire to appear as tough as he possibly can, especially to the military. And so here too, we will not show any mercy. We will be as tough as we possibly can.
It's very easy to scare the public. It's particularly when it's something like the internet, cybersecurity, some kind of danger that people don't really understand very well. And I think a responsible approach is not to scare the public, but to be honest about the threat. Most of what the internet connects to is not what we would call critical infrastructure. Let's say my web page or something. If a terrorist wants to take over my web page, they're welcome to it. I mean, not really, but I'm just saying that, it's not going to cause a danger. The internet's decentralized nature has been an incredible buttress against cyber threats, and it's one of the reasons you haven't seen all kinds of terrible things happen.
There are many, many true threats to us in this world, from fracking, environmental damage, thousands of people dying from pollutants, thousands, millions. You have over 50,000 people a year dying from work-related illness. All right. If you add in the number of people that die in workplace accidents, that's 54,000 people a year dying because of workplace accidents or illness. Now, if you break that down to like how many per day or how many per hour, basically what you're getting is the equivalent of a Boston Marathon bombing every half hour of every day, of every week, of every year. So here's the optic. You've got this situation in the Boston Marathon bombing where a number of people died in the explosion. And it was a terrible thing. And, we went in and we seized houses and we caught these people, etc. But then, meanwhile, 2 days later, a fertilizer plant blows up in Texas, killing more people. And in the beginning, we're like, oh my God, what if it's terrorism? And then we find out, well, it's probably an accident, and no one cares. Well, no one cares, but it doesn't matter if it's like terrorists did it or corporate malfeasance did it. People are still just as dead. Or take West Virginia, there's this huge leak of toxic chemicals, and 300,000 people are left without water, okay? Poisoned the water of 300,000 people. Now, what if terrorists had done that? We would be freaking out. But because it was a corporation that did it through its malfeasance and ineptitude, no one cares. So what's going on? The problem is that we're fearing the wrong things. We're not fearing the things that we ought to. Or forget about fear, we're just obsessed with the wrong things.
We've seen incredible rise of crony capitalism in the United States government, which is corrupting the government and corrupting capitalism. It's again the sense that business and government needs to be in bed together and benefit each other. Business benefits government, not in the old criminal way, they don't bribe people, but by providing the necessary thing that congressmen need to survive, money. And in that relationship, we once again are having this stagnated economic development because economies that are in bed with governments are economies that are about protecting themselves, not about competition. So we need a similar progressive movement.
In fact, I believe there's such a thing as successful social movements to save something that people care about. I'll give you a couple examples. Downtown New York. There was a plan in the 50s to make all of downtown New York freeways. They were like, the West Village, Soho, old buildings, who needs them? Well, what we need to do is just, new freeways. I mean, these plans are crazy, Robert Moses' plans. But they say if you had a plan now to try and plow over the West Village or Soho, it would not happen. Similarly, I think with the national parks, we've had a successful movement. There was a time in this country where people just didn't think about this is worth saving. When they thought about nature, they thought, well, how do we make money? And if we don't make money, who cares? This conception that the environment was something you would save, just, if you'd said that, people wouldn't know what you're talking about. It didn't make any sense. It really took a change in consciousness to have an awareness of the importance of the environment. And it's the same way people felt when you talk about net neutrality for the first time. It's just like, well, what do you mean, the structure of the network? I don't get it, you know, it's just wires and so forth. And so I think today we're going through a same kind of consciousness shift with respect to how information is controlled in a society that we underwent with the environmental movement in the 20th century.
Through the 60s, there were all these really great shifts in consciousness. We had a shift in consciousness about race. We had a shift in consciousness about women's rights. I mean, dramatic, very dramatic. We had a shift in consciousness about the environment. These things come in waves of about every 50 years or so. The last one we had was in the 60s, sort of peaking around 67, 68, where basically the whole world kind of had a raising of consciousness, as it were. And you get these in sort of like 1917. If you go back, it's about a cycle of every 50 years, you know, 1848, 1776. And I suspect that we're just in the beginning stages of this.
This is my friend Aaron Swartz. Aaron came to me with a question, and he said, so how are you ever going to solve the problems you're talking about? Copyright policy, internet policy. How are you going to ever address those problems so long as there's this fundamental corruption in the way our government works? He was saying to me, you've got to get a clue because there is a flaw at the core of the operating system of this democracy. I love that boy. Like I love my son. But we failed him. And I love my country. And I'm not going to fail that. I'm not going to fail that. That sense of hope. We're going to hold and we're going to fight for, however impossible this battle looks. So, may the ideals of one boy unite one nation behind one critical idea that we are one people. We are the people who were promised a government that was promised to be dependent upon the people alone, the people. May you join this movement, not because this is your field, but because if you are a citizen. Aaron asked me that. Now I've asked you.
We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, Only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
America is a fundamentally good country. We have good people with good values who want to do the right thing. But the structures of power that exist are working to their own ends. The greatest fear that I have regarding the outcome for America of these disclosures is that nothing will change. They won't be willing to take the risks necessarily to stand up and fight to change things.
I'm not a fatalist. I think that the future is actually in our hands. You know, the people of the United States can say, we like information to be a little more disaggregated, a little more random, a little more possible to get anything you want as opposed to what's being fed to you. And if we like that system, we can defend it.
The fight has to be to protect the architecture of the internet, to embed and secure the values that we care about.
Well, we have a lot of strategies for doing that. I write little articles in the New York Times. You make documentaries. Other people make documentaries. We talk to our friends. We're going to go to a bar and talk about it later. We're going to call our parents. We're going to tell them about it, right? And we're going to need leaders. We're going to need another Aaron Swartz. We're going to need lots of Aaron Schwartzes to get this to work, right? But then here's the final point. If it's really true that you're not doing anything to scare the power structure, if it's really true that you're not doing anything to make the power structure nervous, and so why should you care? Why the fuck aren't you doing something? Why are you living like a slave, letting these people control the wealth, consolidate wealth, poison your water, poison your air, treat you like shit, treat your parents like shit? Why are you letting that happen? So if you tell me you have nothing to worry about, then I want to say, shame on you, because you should have something to worry about. You should be out there doing something to change this system.